What's up, tea drinkers? Who's ready to spill? Welcome to The Tea with KG, hosted by your girl, Kaylee Grace. Here you'll find your weekly boost of real talk mixed with laughter, healing, and all of those vulnerable, messy moments in between. The Tea with KG is a safe space for you to show up exactly as you are. We are here to share real-life stories from around the globe and be a community of love, joy, and celebrating life. This is a real deal show, so there will be coarse language and sensitive topics discussed. The most beautiful stories oftentimes emerge from the darkest of places, and we're here to explore it all. There's room for everyone at this tea time, so grab your drink of choice, spark it up, or just relax and soak it up. Cheers, and let's spill. What's up, tea drinkers? We are back with another episode of The Tea with KG. I'm your host, Kaylee Grace. We are here to spread the sparkle. I have another amazing guest joining me this week. We have the beautiful Harriet Shearsmith joining us all the way from the UK. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be on this episode.
I can't wait. For everyone watching on YouTube, you can see she's rocking the pink. All the listeners know we love some pink up in here, so super excited. I was like, as soon as I saw her, I was like, this is going to be good. She's got her pink on. We are ready.
I do, but my pink is significantly cozier than your red because it is freezing here at the minute.
Right? I feel like I have like a ring light on for my lighting, and I get so hot usually by the end because it's, the bright lights. I'm like, all right, I'm sweating. I need to take these sweaters off. So yeah, sometimes I try and wear like a warmer thing, and then it's just by the end, I'm like, I'm too hot. Got to get it off.
Yeah.
So Harriet is a mama, she's an author, she's a podcaster, an award-winning UK blogger. Like this girl, she does it all. I am so excited to dive into her story with the who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am, as you say, first and foremost, I'm a mum of three. So my kids are 11, 10, and 7, nearly 8. She's 8 in a couple of weeks.
Oh,
But
exciting.
clinging to that 7.
Oh,
She's my
yes.
my baby, so I'm like she's 7, and shall be up until like the minute before she turns
Yes.
8. I'm also an author. I have my book Mummin It, which is pretty much like all the hacks and tips and tricks that I have come across for mum life and the things that I've learned on my journey. I'm also a content creator, a podcaster. I actually have a new podcast coming out shortly. So super exciting things around there.
Ooh,
And
I
yeah,
just got
that's
goosebumps.
generally me.
That's always
Oh,
a good sign for me. When I get those, I'm like, yep, we're on the right path here. I love
I
that.
love that. I love that. I'm really excited about this one. I think before we started recording this, we briefly mentioned about I talk a lot about parental estrangement and generational trauma. And this podcast is going to be surrounding that and sort of reparenting yourself when you haven't had that positive experience and you become a parent, and then focusing on estrangement and toxic families and healing from that in a digital age, because I feel like we've we've progressed now from where estrangement is so much more than I'm not picking up the phone to you, or yeah, I'm not popping around on a Sunday anymore. It's a much deeper, much more difficult thing to navigate. There is that constant 24/7 digital world, which
Mm.
we're bringing our children up in as well. So I wanted to do something that explored that, and that's what that podcast is going to sit around.
Yes. Oh my God. Absolutely. I cannot wait to plug that in at the end. We will plug everything so everyone can reach you and find your new podcast. I think that is so exciting. And like we were saying before we hit record, I just think that's such an important topic to touch on. And the healing journey from that is not any healing journey. It's got all those bits and pieces you got to work through, and it can be so much deeper. It's not surface level. It is so much deeper than that, and it can create so many different ways that we move through life, and some may be good, some may not be great, but it's so important to take a little self check and look and really dive in and like look at yourself and be like, where does this come from? Or like, what did I go through that's affecting me now? So I think that is so huge, and I love that we're going to touch on that today. So I want to say thank you again for being here and just being open. I really appreciate that.
Oh no, thank you for having me. I think it is, like you say, it's something that should be talked about more. And it's not a linear path. And it's something that massively affects how we communicate with our children and that generational thing. So it's something that I'm really pleased to be able to talk about, and hope that I can
Yeah.
help lots of people with.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I love too hearing your perspective because you are a mom yourself. Like I don't have any human babies yet. I have lots of the fur babies are there, but I can't wait to be a human mom too. So I love hearing things like this. Also your book too. I'm like, I need the hacks for my future human babies. So I love that. As we all know, the human experience, this journey we're on, so many ebbs and flows, so many things that take us through life and how we are now. So, how about we dive into your story?
I started with my content creation and with the path that I'm on now when my eldest was about one, and I followed a really amazing blog that I absolutely loved, and they did all sorts of like crafty things with their children and then days out, and then they would do things for themselves, and I loved it, and I'd never come across blogging before. So this is going back about 10 years now, and I
Yeah.
just wanted to do something where I could create a career, where I could be at home with my children and I could spend, especially those early days with them. I found that I was working part time and my husband was working full time, and we were always sort of passing ships. And I wanted
Mm.
something where I could create a life with them that I saw these women having online. And that's what I started to do. And I started to share these small things. And I loved it. I found so much joy in content creation. And obviously, it's evolved massively
Oh
since
my
I
God,
started.
right?
Oh,
Can you
it's
believe
changed
how it's
so
changed?
much. Completely. Video content I never did. Now most of my platforms are almost exclusively video based,
Yeah.
which I'll be honest, I TikTok is a newer thing for me because I was like, I am not doing that. I am not 12. Absolutely not. And then slowly but surely I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to do that. I don't want to.
Oh my gosh, I know. It
Um,
was a
I
pandemic thing for me. I was like, let me just have fun. I'm bored. It was
yeah.
short-lived. Like I really enjoyed it for that little bit of time. And then I don't know. I'm very I'm very free bird, so it doesn't surprise me. I was like, no, I'm kind of over it. So now I'm trying to do more like the reels because Instagram it's kind of overwhelming too when there's too many platforms. I'm like I can't keep up with all of you.
There's so much, isn't there? And I think so many of them overlap as well, and then they compete with each other. But I actually really enjoy TikTok now, and I think my children, that is probably the platform that my children are like, oh my goodness, please get off there.
Mom. Because that's
Please.
the cool platform for them, right?
Yeah, that's my son turned around to me yesterday and was like, I really want TikTok. I was like, you're 11. You're not having it. He was like, everybody else has got it. I was like, well, I'm not in charge of everybody else.
Yeah.
So we sat down and I spoke to him about it and was like, look, you watch YouTube, you watch YouTube shorts, and I'm gonna throw it out there, babes. They're pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
So but TikTok I'm gonna call you back from, because technically you shouldn't have any of these things until you're 13 anyway. So I don't want to get into trouble for lying about
Mm.
your age.
Yeah.
And he was just like, Mum, we both know that that's not true. I was like, okay. I
I love
think,
that.
I love content creation, and I love that it has allowed me to forge this career where I am now a published author and I can speak
Yes.
about things like estrangement that can help so many people and connect with so many people on that level, whether they have children or whether they are fur baby parents. I know you said
Yes.
you have fur babies. I have fur
Yes.
babies as
Oh, we
well.
love them. Is it a kitty? Oh, I can
She
see
is
right there in the cat
gorgeous.
tree.
She is. Or
Oh,
there
oh
you
my
go. So
gosh. Oh.
she's my son's cat. We had Siamese, and they were when I was much younger, and sadly both of them passed away when they were quite close together. He was like
Mm.
3 and about 5, and he took it so badly when the last one passed away. So I have a video actually on my channels, and when it was his, I want to say 8th birthday. I think it was his 8th birthday. We'd had a good 18-month gap because we needed to be in exactly the right space. You know where I'm going
I know.
with this.
I'm like getting
We
emotional already. I'm like,
in the right space to have a new little family member, but
100%.
have something, because as much as I love like I loved it, it was his birthday present, and as much as I loved doing that for him, it still is, it's a their lifelong commitment, which is a good,
Absolutely.
hopefully, if you're lucky, 15 to 20 years for a cat. So
Yes.
for me, it needed to be the right time, and we waited and waited and waited. And then I found out that these kittens were due to be born and ready for collection the day before his birthday. And
Stop. Oh my
so
God.
he had no idea. I'm not even kidding. He had no idea at all. So I went out and I found in, I think you guys call it TJ Maxx over there. We call it
Oh, yes.
TK Maxx here.
Oh,
So
I didn't know
that is
that.
like, yes. So
Wow.
we call it TK Maxx. No
Okay,
idea why.
cool.
And I found, how they have like everything,
Yes.
everything. I found a birthday cake bed that she still has it.
I'm literally getting teary-eyed right now because I'm just like, oh my God. Oh my God.
So I'll have to send you a link to the video
Please
because
do. Okay, is it
she,
one of those like birthday videos where you give and like that those I watch all the time and I
yes,
cry every time.
yeah, that's exactly it. So she was curled up in this little bed, and I went and picked her up the night before. I got them all in bed and then arranged to go and pick up the kitten. And I got home, still no clue. Nobody had any clue but me and my husband. And we got her snuggled down in this little bed. And he came down in the morning and he got like some wrestling figures because he's a big WWE fan and he
Mhm.
liked that, as is his dad.
Yep.
And he liked that. He'd got like a little wrestling ring, and we'd found them secondhand. So he was looking at all that setup, and then he noticed in the middle of everything was this birthday cake, and he was like, "What is that?" And
Oh
he
my
just
God.
poked his head in, and his face, that will stay with me for the rest of my life, is like the best
That is
moment.
pure joy to me. That is
It was such a
absolutely pure
shock.
joy.
Like he
Oh my
was just
gosh.
so, and his whole mouth dropped, and then he started to cry,
Oh my God.
which is just this,
I
because
need to
he's a
see
very
it.
emotional little thing. And
Mhm.
he
Very
burst into
I feel
tears.
that. Oh my
And
gosh.
then she came. I'd got her a little collar that was too big for her with a little bow on it. And she came out to him. She'd spent half the morning sort of like hissing at me as if to say, "I do not know you. You're a very excitable woman.
Yeah.
I'm I'm not okay with this vibe. This
Yes.
vibe is this
This
vibe
is
is
not
giving
it.
me too much. This is too much. Okay, I'm being adopted. This is too much."
Yeah.
Whereas for Toby, she was just like, "Okay, you can be my human," and they're
Oh, she
inseparable.
chose him. I love
Absolutely
that. Isn't that meant to
inseparable.
be like the
Yeah.
universe when it does stuff like that, it gives me life because I'm just like, it's so meant to be. And
It
like
was
seeing
so
that
meant to be.
connection. Oh, yes. What's the kitty's name?
Oreo.
Oreo. So cute. Did your
Yeah,
son name
because
her?
yeah, it was actually my son's friend. He went into school that morning, which we thought was great as well because it gave her some chill time, because otherwise he would
Yeah.
have been all over her. And cats, any animal that comes into your home, becomes part of your family, needs to acclimatize. So
100%.
it
Especially
was a
cats.
blessing.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. It was a blessing. And he went off to school, and we were originally thinking, we were big Disney fans. So we were originally thinking Mulan, because our
Hmm.
original Siamese was called Mushu, and we have
Oh.
Nala and Mushu. So we were thinking, well, what could we call her? Could we call her Mulan? Because she's going to be a little princess.
Hmm.
And then his friend said, "Oh, she's got this little dark point," because she's a Siamese, a pointed
Yep.
Siamese. So they were like, "Oh, she's got this little dark face and this white body and these little dark paws. She's like a little Oreo." She is, and it just stuck. And he came back and he was like, "Mummy, I think I'm gonna call her Oreo." And I was like, "I
Oh
want you
my
to
gosh.
call her a Disney name," but it
Yeah.
just fitted so well. It really did.
Oh, I
So
love that. Oh my God, that's so
yeah,
cute. Those are literally when we're done, send me that link because
I will
I
do. I
love those videos,
will.
especially when the kids cry. I'm just like, I am crying. Like, I actually like, I have like visions of when I'm eventually a mother, like doing something like that. I will be bawling with them, like, yes,
Oh yeah.
honey.
I completely was. Like the original video, you got music over it because you could just hear me in the background. Like, it's not, nobody wanted it. Nobody needed
Oh my
that.
gosh,
In
that
the,
would be me. Oh my God,
yeah.
that's reminding me of like at concerts. I am like screaming and singing, and all you hear is me. And I'm like, girl,
Yes.
you need to stop because so
Yes.
now I'll like take a real quick video and then I stop and I'm like, then I just sing so I don't
Yeah.
have to listen to that because nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah. That is my vibe. So again, I was essentially created this life wanting to be with the children and to do more things around them. And as
Yeah.
time progressed, I slowly sort of became more and more on Instagram
Mhm.
and more sort of creating content as opposed to the traditional written form. And yeah, and when my daughter came along, that got bigger and bigger, and it just kept growing. Um, and kind of went from one strength to the next, really.
I
Writing
love
had always
that.
been something that was a passion for me. I've always
Hmm.
really loved writing. So when the opportunity came up to write a book, I was so excited about it. It was something I'd
Yeah.
always wanted to do. So that was something that I did through lockdown, actually.
Oh
So
my gosh,
we
yes.
yes, it was. It was something already agreed, we'd already agreed the book, it was already set in motion, and then
Hmm.
the world kind of just shut down. And
Yeah.
I had 3 kids that I was homeschooling, and my husband was really struggling with his mental health. He found it really difficult because he's a
Hmm.
very outdoorsy, very active person, so
Yeah.
he really struggled with it. And then this book that I was writing, and I guess in a way it gave me something to focus on in addition to
Hmm.
being able to focus on the kids and their homeschooling, but it gave
Yeah.
me a purpose to keep going, and I
Purpose. Yeah.
love writing that. Yeah,
Oh my
I
gosh,
love
yes. And I love so much when people can take their passions and turn it into something. Like, I just live for that. And it just makes me so happy to see people pursuing their dreams and living it. And I love what you were saying too about wanting to create that life where you could be there for your babies, because that's literally my goal. Like, that's what I want too. I'm like, I want that time freedom. So, I get football there, but like soccer here. But I was like, so if they have a soccer game, whatever, I can be there. Like, I don't want to be limited. So I love that so
yeah.
much that that was kind of like your why. And then it just transformed into so much. And it's amazing. And I love too, if anyone checks out her Instagram, like it is awesome content. Like you post so
Oh,
consistently in your videos, and I'm just like, it's so inspiring, especially for other people out there doing social media kind of things. I look at you, I'm like, okay, she's doing the do. I need to do the do more. So I love that so much.
oh, thank you so much. It's funny that you should say that, and I think we all have these moments of like a crisis of confidence. Because earlier today I was thinking, yeah, I got to step up my game. I am not doing enough. I am not doing this. I'm not doing that. So it's really reassuring to hear you say that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important when we say these things to each other and take the time to remind each other of how well we're doing, because
Yes.
it's so easy to fall into that trap of self-doubt and doubting
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And I speak a lot about body confidence and self-confidence and self-belief, and that's an ongoing process for me, something that the last few years have been rough, they've been difficult, and
Mm.
it's really kind of knocked my confidence and knocked that self-belief. So to be able to help others build that and build that back up myself has been really good for me.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my God, I'm so here for that. And like, I think building each other up, it's just like the simplest, most beautiful thing we can do as humans, especially like, I'm not trying to put it into a gender thing, but especially women, like, there shouldn't be
Yeah,
that
no, I'm with you.
competition. Like, we can all get there together and collaborate. And I just love when I find like-minded souls who were like, yes, like you, it was such you were just like, sure, I'll come on your podcast. I was like,
Yeah.
thank you. And it's just nice to feel seen and heard and
Yes.
like valued, right? So
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that that's something you value as well. Obviously, there's a reason we're connected. It really feels like I'm talking to someone
Exactly.
like that I've known for forever.
Exactly.
I love that.
But that's great. And I think that's the thing. And I completely agree with you about what you say about it, especially important for women, because we live in a patriarchal society where we are taught to kind of pit against one another, and we can all do better if we all rise up with one another. And I think that's the most important thing for me, is to it costs us nothing to be kind. It costs us nothing to work together. And I always said when I started this that there is enough internet to go around for everybody. So we can
Yes.
collab together. We can support one another. We might be technically, when we're working in this industry, each other's competition, but we can also be each other's champions. And I love the concept of being able to champion other people, other women. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to start talking more about estrangement and more about toxic family relationships, because I think that through connecting with each other and feeling seen and heard, that's when we destigmatize this kind of thing, and that was so important for me.
Preach it, sister. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And it's like the more open we are in sharing our vulnerable side and our stories, the more as humans we can be open and understand each other more. And maybe someone's going through something you've never experienced, but once you hear their story, like I love hearing people's stories. I'm like, let me get in there. Let's peel
Yeah.
back the layers because it helps you understand people. And with understanding, you gain empathy and compassion. And to me, our world needs to run like that. Like, be compassionate, care for each other. Like, I just feel like our world has transformed in a way that I'm just like, this is a little messed up. Like, we're focusing much too much on money, greed, power. It's not about that. It's not about capitalism. It's not about that. It should be coming back to basics, right? Caring for people, working through your trauma, being open, helping others, serving people. Like, that's what's up.
Yeah, exactly. And that human connection, I think, I don't know if it was the pandemic. I don't know if it was the lockdowns. I don't know if it's just the trajectory that we've been on for a long time. But I think we lost that human connection somewhere along the way. And one of the great things about the internet, one of the things that I do love about being on it, and don't get me wrong, there are a million and one things that I do not love about being online.
Right.
Everybody can say the same.
Yes. It's like it's got its pros and
Oh,
cons for sure.
yeah, exactly. It's like if you were to write a pros and cons list, they'd be fairly well matched.
Yes.
But one of the things that I do really, really love is that human connection and that you can connect with other people and you can build communities of like-minded people. I think for me, that's been one of the unexpected things that I have loved the most about this journey. When I had my first child, I had sepsis after he was born. I was incredibly ill, and I'd been able to connect with other mothers through that. I'd been able to connect with other mothers through not being able to breastfeed him, and then later being able to breastfeed my other children and breastfeed for an extended period with my daughter. So at each stage throughout, there's always been something where I can connect with other like-minded people, or people who, especially as the accounts got bigger, maybe felt like they were the only ones. And that's what I found, particularly with talking about generational trauma and toxic families, is that there is this massive community of us, but we all
Mhm.
seemed, before we found it, to think we were the only ones that this has happened to.
Yes.
Or even if we knew on a disassociated level that there were others out there who were in the same position, it felt so lonely. And I
Yeah.
think there's so many stages within life where we feel so alone and so lonely and so isolated, and we know on on one plane that we're not alone, because how
Mhm.
can we be? Whatever you're
Mhm.
experiencing life, there will be somebody else who's experienced the same.
Yes.
There always will be. However, unless you can see it, it's very difficult to believe it, and that's why
100%.
we've got to talk about these things.
Absolutely. That was so well said. So, so true because it's exactly like you said. Like, logically, yeah, we know we're not alone, but it's when you actually connect with people who are like, I see you, I get you. It's like, you just feel exactly like we said earlier, seen and heard and valued. And as humans, like, in our DNA, like go back to like when we were cave people, it was so much simpler because it was more of a survival over everything. And you had to be with people or you wouldn't survive. So I learned this from one of my other guests. He said basically like rejection equaled death back then because if you had no shelter, no food, no whatever, you would die. Now it's still subconsciously like within us, not rejection per se, but like not having that community. It feels like how do I keep going, and you don't feel as fulfilled. Like, I totally get it, some people need alone time, things like that, but you still need to have someone you connect to, especially if they understand your journey or your trauma in their own sense. So I think that's so so key, and I love so much that you've been able to connect with people in every part of your journey, like different ways. I think that's so awesome.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny you should say that, actually, because I was reading something not so long ago about genetics and trauma, and
Yeah.
how it was to do with a Will Smith film that was about slavery and racism.
Yes.
And the person that was talking about it was talking about the trauma that is passed down through DNA. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same as I can't remember the term for it now, but it was so fascinating. And she'd linked all these different scientific studies that show that trauma is carried in our
It's
DNA.
in the
It's
body.
not just
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the body.
100%.
It's not just a generational thing. It's not just a mindset thing.
Hmm.
It is in your physical DNA and carried through.
Yes.
So when you look at what we once were, where that rejection equaled a really serious situation, it wasn't just
Yeah.
a, oh, that hurt my feelings. It was literal life and death.
Exactly. Like your fight or flight would kick in, like your survival instincts.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and how we still have that fight or flight. It all
Yeah.
makes sense if you think of it from that point of view,
Right.
that we
It's
you
so
say, yeah.
fascinating,
Oh,
right?
it's so fascinating,
I
so
agree.
fascinating.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so funny you bring that up. I'm like, again, all these synchronicities are always signs to me. I'm like, this was meant to be. A guest I just had on, actually, we were talking about the indigenous intergenerational trauma, and we talked exactly about that, how it's stored for like in the body, generation to generation. And it can take so much work to work through all of that because the body doesn't forget, but you have to remind the body, like, we are safe. This is not
Yeah.
an, and that's such a challenge. I've had to work through that in my own self as well. And it's just, it's kind of a foreign thing at first. You're like, what's going on here? Like, what am I
Yeah.
feeling right now?
Yeah.
And then, you know, finding that self discovery and actually learning more. It's not an overnight process by any means. As we say, healing is not linear.
Yeah.
It does what it wants, and that's
It
okay.
does.
But yeah,
And you
it's
you think you've got to that point where you're like, "Do you know, I've worked through this now. I'm so clever. I've done
right.
this, and I'm feeling good about me," and then bam, you hit a brick wall and you're like, "Well,
100%. It's so,
why?"
yeah, life will humble you very quickly. It's so
Very
funny.
quickly. You will feel like you are doing so well, and then something will happen, and you will just think, "Wow, I need to ring my therapist."
Oh
And
my
you
God,
just
right?
thought you were doing fine without them, and you just got to write that email that's like, "Could you call me?
Yeah, I need you.
I'm doing really well. But if we could just move our appointment forward a bit, that would be great."
That's so true. Oh my gosh, you're making me laugh. You're so funny, but it's so true. I feel like the exact same way. And I feel like that's so relatable because it's interesting, like the depth of certain wounding. Cause like I've mentioned this before, I have certain wounds that are so deeply embedded. They're from like childhood, they're deep. And I feel like one in particular I am always working at, and it's finally, I'm not going to say that too lightly because, girl, we know life might humble me again. I may
We
be
do.
triggered again, but I feel like finally, and I'm saying this has been like, oh my God, over 20 years in the making. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm finally kind of getting to a different place with it, but I'm very mindful of it. I'm like, okay, beware, like this isn't completely gone, but at least it's so awesome when you're kind of in a different place with it, even if it took
Yeah.
you forever. And even if you do get rocked again, you're still not where you were at one time. So
That's
that's also
it.
so interesting, right?
Yeah, and that's it. That's it with healing, I think, and especially with things that we'd mentioned before about the mother wound and healing from toxic parents and that generational dysfunctional family trauma. I don't think that you're ever done.
No,
I think you're constantly learning, you're constantly
me too.
developing, you are constantly getting to the next place with it. And that's
Preach.
okay. I think quite often when we think of therapy and we think of wounds and trauma and healing, you think of it almost like a cut that you'll get on your finger, and
That's such
it'll,
a
it'll
great way
scab
to
over.
say it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's such
it'll
a good
scab over.
analogy.
It'll be a bit sore for a while, but actually, okay, yeah, that scab's going to drop off, and then you'll have the little pink line, and then eventually you'll forget that it was ever even there.
Hmm.
But it's not like that, and I think emotional
No.
wounds rarely are, and some of those wounds leave scars with us, and we have to be mindful of those scars, and that's okay, but we have to move to a different place of that, and like a scar, it will develop, it will change over time, it will grow with you, but it's never really gone, not fully. And I think thinking of therapy and working on yourself and working on those deep-seated wounds, those traumas, that mother wound or the generational trauma that you're trying to work past, to think of it in those terms of, okay, no, this might never leave me. It's a fundamental part of who I am, but I can work with it as opposed to working against it.
Yes, so much yes, because ultimately those wounds, they just want to be loved. They just want a big hug. It's just like it could be your inner child being needing love. It could be so many things. Even if things happen in your adult life, it's still a part of you that just wants to be loved. So sometimes when these emotions come out so strongly, don't beat yourself up. I have a hard time with that sometimes because naturally I'm
Yes.
very positive and optimistic, but girl, I got the feels. I'm very, very feely. So, it's not always rainbows and butterflies, even though I wish it was, but it's not. And you
Yeah.
have to feel those emotions fully and be like, where are you? Where's the root? Because it's not generally surface. It's usually linked to something much deeper. And lean into it and don't criticize yourself for feeling that because everyone feels things and it's okay. Give yourself a
Yeah.
hug. Learn how to love that little part that is like, I need you to love me right now, or I need this right now. Don't beat yourself up over that. I speak from that just because I feel like a younger me definitely was like, oh, you shouldn't be feeling, you shouldn't be this. And I'm like, no, let it out, honey. Let's go.
It's so true, and it's one of those things that I think so many of us are guilty of doing to ourselves. I will sit here and say to everybody, and I give the best advice in my DMs, and I'm like, "Oh, that was clever,"
Right,
and then
right.
I look back, and I'm like, at some point you should probably take some of this advice, just a
Oh my
little bit of
gosh.
the advice.
Preach. Oh my
Just
gosh. I feel like
any of the little any nugget of what you give out there. If you could
I
take it yourself,
totally
that
can
would
relate to
be
you.
such a good idea. That would
It's
be
so
really
funny
beneficial.
when you're giving advice and you're like, yes, yes, yes. And then, like, exactly like you just said, be like,
Mhm.
okay, wait, apply that to me now. Like,
Yes. It's funny because I think we're so good at encouraging other people to love themselves, to look after themselves, to be kind to themselves, to treat themselves with empathy. And if we could treat ourselves how we would treat our friends, how we would treat our colleagues. And I often say this, when you think about if you're giving yourself or your friend a pep talk, and the way that you do the two of them is so different. Like you'll be with your friend, you'll be like,
yes.
"You're amazing. You've got all these talents, all these skills. Anybody would so lucky to have you." And then you get to yourself and you're like, well, I could have
You're,
worked harder.
yeah. Or I'll be like saying stuff, but I don't really like believe it yet. I'm like, you're
Yeah.
amazing. But I'm like, am I? Am I? You know what I mean? You kind of question it a little bit. But then to like your friends, you're like, you're a motherfucking queen. You are
Yes.
this, can do
Yeah.
this, this. Like, it is like hype queen. Here she is. And I just think, like you just said, it's so important. Be your own hype queen, hype king, however
Yeah.
you identify.
And it's a learning curve for absolutely everybody. It truly is.
Mm,
And I think, you can work on it. And as well, for me, it's challenging that negative inner voice.
yes, the
I was
saboteur.
raised by really toxic parents. And for me, my mum in particular had a lot of narcissistic qualities, or
Mm,
narcissistic traits, I should say, not really qualities,
mhm,
but narcissistic traits that are so damaging for you to grow up in that environment. And
mhm.
one of the things that I have picked up from that is a really negative inner critic and really
Yeah.
negative self talk. So I will now actively sit with myself. And one of the things that I do every morning, I write like a little positivity journal. And I will write my good intentions for the day, which FYI every day is go to sleep earlier. And every day
Yeah.
I say that. I don't know why I write it at this point. I'm like, what? I don't know why you write that.
One day.
Stop writing it. Just stop it. Don't even do it, because you get to the evening and you're like, oh look, it's early bedtime. It's 20 to 12, and stop writing it.
Yeah.
So that's a note to myself. Um, but I think every time I write something in there, a really common one that crops up for me, especially if I'm around that period where I'll get PMS and I get
Uh-huh.
really
The
low,
hormones
I
are
will
raging.
start, yeah,
Mhm.
the hormones go crazy. I will start writing, challenge that negative voice, sit with every thought. So when that negative thought pops up or that really harsh self critic pops up, I will sit with it for a couple of seconds and go, okay, was that fair? And
Mhm.
okay, sometimes I'll think, yeah, it was fair.
Mhm.
I'm really cross. Yes, it was fair. I'm going to be mean to myself, and then I'll be like, Harriet, but was it? Uh,
Yeah.
but was it? Would it be necessary to speak? Could you have said it in a nicer way? Um, and when I think about it, all joking apart, it's a huge thing to start challenging that negative inner voice. And I think that works so well in
Mhm.
the journey towards healing those wounds is to start sitting with those negative thoughts, to start
Yes.
questioning whether or not what you're actually saying to yourself is A, fair and accurate, because
Mhm.
more often than not, it's not.
Mhm.
Especially if you're like me, I know you say you're quite a positive person. I can be a really negative person, especially when it comes to myself, my own achievements. Like, I'm not
Yes.
very good at celebrating my achievements.
I feel that
Uh,
way too. It's so funny you say that because like the way I approach life, very like sunshine, but I've always been super hard on myself. Always like it never was good enough. Never. Like the self-worth, that has been such a journey for me and like just the self-love and like oh my God, if I could like I say about the inner child, but I have had certain like meditative moments where I have like feel like I've healed her a little and just give her a hug and been like if my little self could see me now, she would be like, "What?" Like, you know what I
yeah.
mean? And it's just like giving yourself that is so important, but I totally understand what you're saying. Like I feel giving it to myself is so much more challenging like we said
Yeah.
than giving it to others. So I
Oh,
love
it
that
is.
you mentioned that about challenging those thoughts because the saboteur she she will say things that are not true, but I like also that you approach it with a let me just analyze this, like is there truth or validity to this? If yes,
Yeah.
where do we need to grow a little, where do we need to heal a little, improve a little? But like you said too, most of the times the way our inner saboteur says things to us is not nice.
Yeah. No, she can be mean. She's a bitch.
Yeah, she is a
Mhm.
bitch. She's like,
She
I'm
is a bitch.
here. And oh my gosh, okay, I have to tell you another analogy. This, I have to give props. This is from Joey. He's like, he's a therapist. He's amazing. He had so many good words of wisdom, but it goes with this. This is more emotional based, but like, let's say he's like, a picture you're driving. Yourself is in the driver's seat and all your emotions are in the other seats. He's like, for him, he's like, anger is usually in my passenger side. The
Mm.
anger is the playlist. You're putting on the music for me. And then he said to think of it like this: when your emotions are trying to get in the driver's seat, envision it like, be like, no, get back in the passenger seat or get back in the back seat. Like, you're not driving, I'm driving. And I just loved that because it
I
kind of
love that.
separated it. Right. Props to Joey. Like, oh my gosh, I picked up so much from him from that episode. I was
That's
like,
so
yes,
clever.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it breaks it down a little and it makes it less like, it's not you are the anger. It's just like, it's just a little part. It's just the emotion. It's
Yeah.
get back in the passenger seat. Put on a song for me. Like,
Yeah. Exactly. No, I really like that. I really like
yeah.
that. And I think as well, I quite often will think of myself as like I'll have little Harriet, or I'll have, especially when I talk about things in therapy, I'll be like, okay, well, little Harriet probably really wanted this, but she didn't
Mm.
get it. And practical Harriet, and my therapist pointed it out to me not so long ago. She's like, you do talk about yourself in different fragments. I was
Yeah.
like, what are you analyzing me with? She's like, nothing other than maybe a bit of hypochondria. Take a deep breath. Um, I'm not analyzing you with anything. I'm just saying, I think you do tend to section yourself off, which works quite well for you.
Mhm.
You just need to focus a little bit more on this little person here
Mm.
and think about how maybe this one talks to that one and this one talks to that, and think about it more in that rational way. And that's how I came to that kind of analyzing my negative self-talk, and it's
Yeah.
helped me massively. It really has, just to
Mm.
sit with it and challenge it.
Absolutely. I love that. And it's sometimes the most challenging thing is to just sit with it, especially like emotions, but thoughts too. Because it depends, I think, how we're wired. I feel things like times a million. So sometimes for me, emotions are so strong, they'll kind of take over the mind a little bit sometimes. So I have to
Yeah.
really practice like grounding and breathing and like because again you have to ground the physical body so the brain can breathe and be like, okay, what's actually real right now, what's actually happening, how can I decipher this? So I think that's such a great tip, is to be able to sit with your thoughts or your feelings, whatever, and actually take a look at it and be like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and question it and say, am I being fair here? Would I say that to somebody else? No. Okay, how can we rethink this? Because maybe I did make a mistake and that does need analyzing and maybe a little bit of critiquing so that I can learn and
Yeah.
grow and do better. But equally, do I need to completely lambast myself for it? Probably not.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that's so powerful. I love that so, so much. You were mentioning with your parental estrangement, you said you grew up with like a narcissistic mother. Do you want to talk more on that and kind of how it's shaped you? And I'm not sure about the relationship with your father, but if you want to dive right in and we can chat more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I had such a close relationship with my mum, and I was very much under the impression that that was really normal, that was really
Hmm.
healthy, everything was fine, and it very much was quite, it was the opposite of those
Mm,
things. For me, it was what is commonly talked about in psychology and when talking about covert narcissism, was
okay.
what a term called enmeshment, where my mum didn't really see where she ended and where I began.
Okay.
I was more like treated like an extension of her. So she actually lived with us up until midway through the pandemic. We'd built her an annex, we'd bought her house and converted what was the garage, had the whole thing ripped down, built an annex separate. So, an annex, I don't know if you guys have annexes
Is it like
over
a
there.
granny suite?
Yes.
That's what,
So it's like
okay.
a granny house. Yeah. So it was a completely separate house with its own
But like
kitchen,
your
its own
property,
bathroom,
right?
but on the
Yes.
property. Yeah.
Yep.
So it
Granny
was like
suite. Yeah.
its own, yeah, granny suite. So over here we might call them an annex, or
Hmm.
sometimes they are called a granny flat.
Okay.
Um, but we built that for her and we made it perfect. And just at every stage of the way, it became increasingly volatile. And I think I started to really notice fractures in our relationship when I started having children, because that was my attention diverted away. And I would say, oh, well, I'm not going to do that that way. I'm going to do that this way. And
Yeah.
slowly but surely, that became more and more fractured. And then when my mum retired and was around much more, I noticed that a lot more of her toxic behaviors became really apparent. And it was the endless critique. And my husband would say, don't speak to her like that. Don't do that. That's not, don't do
I
that to
like that your
her.
husband stood up for you.
He did when he felt able, he did. And I think what I wanted to achieve with building her an annex, or was to be able to have that good daughter, to be able to be that loyal daughter that was there, that was fulfilling the role she felt that she owed to her mother, which I examine a lot more now, because that's how I was raised, that you don't leave your parent, that you do everything for them, that you should be able to welcome them into your home like perhaps they do on the continent. And I wanted to fulfill that role, but also was attempting to get some kind of distance, just some,
Yes.
just so I could have a little bit of freedom. And I just wanted her
Hmm.
to be happy whilst I could have that little bit of freedom. And it really was not going to work. I think the more freedom I got, the nastier and more toxic things became, to the point at which I eventually asked her to move out of the annex and offered to buy her a property somewhere else and make sure that she was set up for life, and she didn't want that, and things became incredibly toxic and difficult. And what I really wanted was to be able to create that distance and to be able to create a lower contact while we worked on our issues separately.
Hmm.
And that just was not, as is, if anybody has had any experience with a narcissist or people who have narcissistic traits, because let's be real, I'm not a therapist and I would never try to diagnose somebody with something. My therapist has said, yeah, there's a narcissist.
Yes.
But my therapist would also not diagnose someone who they'd never spoken to. So you
Exactly.
can't. And most people who are narcissists, who have narcissistic personality disorder, would not be diagnosed anyway because they don't see anything wrong with themselves.
Exactly.
So it's a really difficult
Difficult
disorder.
journey.
And it
Yeah.
is, and it's a very overused term now. So I
It's
think,
a lot overused. I feel like people don't actually know what it is. Like
yeah,
they take what one part of it is and apply it to, oh, this person. And like, no, it's deeper than that. It's not just
it's
the surface. So
so
I
much
like that you
deeper.
brought that up because it is a
Yeah.
very common term now.
Yes. And I think we as people, I did when I was younger, because that's how I was raised. I had a lot of narcissistic traits when I was much younger. I think I mirrored my mum's behavior, and I can see that now. And that's something that I've had to work on forgiving myself, and to,
Mhm.
understand that about myself, especially in my late teen years. And apparently, the more I learn about adult children of narcissistic mothers, the more I realize that that's incredibly common, especially in the middle to sort of late teens, early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Very common for them to reflect those traits, to have that kind of adolescent immaturity and reflect it in that manner. Um, and that's something that I experienced and have had to work on. And I feel like the more that I became my own person, the more that that enmeshment was challenged, and the more that that created this really difficult environment. My mum would
Mm.
come in and shout and swear at me in front of the kids. She'd
Oh
be
my
racist in front of
God.
the kids and that kind of thing. And
Stop.
we would ask for these things. We would challenge it on the spot and say, we don't want that
Yeah.
around our children.
No, it's
And it would just
toxic.
then become more of a thing to do, to try and get under
Mm.
your skin, and that's the
Ugh.
behavior. And
Yeah, it gives me the
exactly,
ugh, it gives me the ick because it's like when you put
it's
those boundaries up, they don't like that. They're like, no,
no,
no, this isn't how
the
this
more
works.
the boundaries came into place, the more the relationship spiraled. And I
Mm-hmm.
have said all along that I didn't want to become estranged from my mum.
No.
My plan when I sat down with her was to say to her, look, this isn't working. We'd always discussed before we bought the house that if we ever found ourselves in a position where it wasn't working, that we would make sure that she was set up, because that was what was right, because she'd
Yep.
helped us to fund the house initially.
Mm-hmm.
She lowered what the price and things. So we would make sure that she would be in the same position she would have been if she'd have sold her house to a complete stranger, and she'd be
Yes.
set up for life, and that would be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not enough, because that meant relinquishing control, and that meant relinquishing me as her, I don't even know the word,
Your
me as
extension, like the extension of
her
her. Yeah.
extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, me as the extension. And therein created a huge problem. Um, and eventually, after a legal battle, she did move out of the house, and I haven't spoken to her since. And the hope was that we would have had some distance between us, and then been able to put those building blocks back into place where we could have a relationship that was on a more even ground. But that
Yeah.
was never going to work. And I think, having had all of my life really with just myself and my mum, it made it even more difficult. It compounded it. I was an only child. So when you have a narcissistic parent, there is usually a scapegoat child,
Mm-hmm.
and a golden child, and
Yep.
sometimes an invisible child. And when you're the only child, you play all of those
All
roles,
the
and you
roles
do
are
all the
yours.
roles. And
Oh.
I can tell you all of the ways in which I can relate to those different roles at different times.
Yeah.
And my dad and my parents had quite a volatile, an extremely volatile divorce. I think there was a
Mm.
lot of parental alienation that went on between myself and my dad from my mum.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do remember enough of my dad to know that he was also a really toxic man, which is a real shame. But we know from the research done into narcissism and into people who are emotionally immature, that they quite often lead towards each other, or
Mm-hmm.
people who have a lot of these traits quite often
Attract it,
lead
right?
they
Yeah.
quite
Whatever
often
level
attract it.
you're at, it's kind of what you bring. Yeah.
Exactly. And quite often, people who have been raised by narcissists will attract a narcissist as a partner, because it's what they knew. It's
It's what
healing
they
that
know
child wound, it's
exactly.
that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I think, I remember enough of my dad, and certainly enough of my experience with his wife, to know that all three adults in my upbringing really let me down.
Mm.
And that created a lot of trauma, and it's something that I
Absolutely.
have been incredibly um determined to not allow to repeat, something that I'm
Breaking that
determined to break
cycle.
that cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want it for my kids. And I think, when we speak to people, especially older generations, about generational trauma and about their behavior, like, I would challenge my mum and she would say, well, I had it worse, or, well, I had to deal with that, you can get on
Yeah.
with it. And I've always found that so bizarre. I've always thought to myself, well, hang on a minute, why would you want that for your children? Because I've had to deal with
Exactly.
these things,
And like we're
and
never
I
done
don't.
growing, like you said, and it's almost like they hit a wall where it's like I'm fine. I don't need anything else. And it's
Yeah,
like, no,
yeah,
like I'm going to be learning till the day I die. Like it's
yeah,
not going to stop. Doesn't matter how old I am. Like it's so important to be open, like just being open to hearing someone and their point of view. And it's okay if disagreements happen, but to have that mutual
Yeah.
love and respect, to have those conversations, I wish that for everyone, because yeah, it's so challenging, especially when there's toxicity, and it's hard to speak to people who are in that frame of mind. Like I've had different relationships, let's say, with people like that. And it's, you want so much to just be able to talk, and it doesn't work. It's like there's always
Yeah.
something wrong with it, or they'll throw it back in your face or
Yeah.
deflect or whatever. And that's not healthy either.
No, it's not. And I think, I speak to countless people every day about their estrangements or their toxic family, and people will constantly get in touch with me and ask advice, or, just to say, I'm having the similar experience and you're making me feel less alone. And the people who seem to either be coming through it or who have gone lower contact but not gone full estrangement and no contact
Hmm.
are the people who can kind of meet and go, I've done stuff that's not appropriate, and you've
Yes.
done stuff that's not appropriate. How can we both be better for each other? And that's all
Yes.
that people are asking, because I know that in the later months of my relationship with my mum coming to its full completion, I know that my behaviour was reactive and
Yes.
reactively abusive. And I know that when what I've learned is, she would only have to come across, she used to come across from her part of the house to ours and just walk in. And I know every time she did, I can feel it now, even like that between your shoulder blades
Yes. The
and that clenching of the
tension.
jaw, and everything would go
Yeah.
tense. And my husband would see it every day. And it really, it did a number on our relationship, because he
Hmm.
could see how far I was falling and couldn't really do anything, because whenever it was raised, it would be, but she's my mum and I owe it to her. And let me tell you, if there's one thing that your listeners take away from this, it is that you do not owe your parents anything. And I never, ever want my children to think they owe me a debt, because they don't. And
Yes.
that is not to say that I don't want them to be grateful. And it's also not to say, despite knowing that my childhood was extremely emotionally abusive, and being able to reflect on things, and the more I remember of things that I have suppressed and that I have
Mm.
blocked, I know that my childhood was extremely damaging. I am still
Yeah.
extremely grateful for the things that my mum did get right, and for
Yes.
the sacrifices that I know she made, because I know she made them. And her behavior was abysmal. My dad's behavior was abysmal.
Hmm.
However, I think they were both damaged people who I would love to say I have empathy for. I'm not quite there yet.
Yep.
And I think in a
Yeah.
way I do have empathy, and I am learning to grow that empathy for them and for their
Hmm.
behaviors, because I can see now, as a mum and as an adult myself, how their generational trauma had affected them. And
Yes.
I can see the toxicity between them and the way they fed off each other with that. And
Yeah.
my dad in particular was not in the picture very much. I don't really very often talk about him, but it's come more into the circle more often now.
Hmm.
And I think, I see where that relationship left them, and I see how they behave towards each other, and I see how they behave towards me. And I think being able to say, I am appreciative of the things that they did get right, and
Hmm.
I am appreciating. My mum was a single mum who worked extremely long hours to be able to afford things for me, and that, I don't dismiss that. But there is
Right.
a difference between gratitude and being indebted to somebody. And that
Preach.
was what I was raised with. I was raised with a debt purely for existing. And
Oh,
that
that
is
just broke my
excruciating.
soul. Like that was
Yeah.
the most heartbreaking thing to hear, because that should not be it. Like you just said, like no one is indebted to anybody, because it shouldn't work like that. It should be a flow of gratitude and love and respect. And oh my gosh, that just breaks my heart. But I love so much that you're just like, that's not getting repeated, because yes, it's great. Your kids, they'll be grateful, but they're going to sense like the way you raise them and that love, and like That's it. Like I would be the same. I would never I want my kids to be their own individual people and I just want to guide them and be there for them as I can. I talk about my kids. I'm like, they're not here yet, but one day, right?
I know what you mean though. You want that next generation to feel safe and secure in who
Yes.
they are, not who you want them to be. And
Yes.
that's the thing. And that really is kind of one of the most important things for me to get out there, is that you don't owe. And quite often, especially with immature parents or toxic parents, or yes, narcissistic parents, there will be that you hear it all the time of
Yeah.
everything I did for you. And that's not what it's about, because that is your job. Once you become a parent, that is your job, to provide those things for that child and to provide that love and that care. And these are basics. Okay,
Yeah.
these are
The
basics.
survival
And
basics. Yes.
survival basics, like, go to therapy if you think that's a big deal. It's
Yes.
basic. And
Yes.
I think for me, I quite often, one of the biggest kickbacks that I will get from people, especially from young people who have this wonderful relationship, they will say to me, "You're disgusting, you're really ungrateful. I owe my parents everything." And I will say to them, "No, you're grateful to your parents. There's a huge difference between being indebted and owing someone a debt and being grateful for what they did. Big difference."
Yes.
And then once you have a conversation around that, they'll go, "Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense."
Exactly.
And
Yes.
generationally, there has been that idea of a debt that needs to be paid, but nobody should be in debt purely for existing. That's not what it's about.
Mic drop. Mic drop. That's it. Mic drop. Like,
We're done. There we go. My pearl of
absolutely.
wisdom.
Yeah. It's so, so true. I love so much that you're bringing these things up because I guarantee there are people listening who can so relate. It truly is my hope for parents and the youth of tomorrow. I feel like I'm making a speech right now, the youth of tomorrow, but you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like that's so important. And I value that so much, is breaking those things. Cause like as we know, like, your parents do the best with the tools they have. And some may not have many tools in their toolbox. So they have no idea how to react or behave. But that doesn't mean what they've done is okay, but
Yeah.
it's like what you're saying, like it doesn't mean we're ungrateful for the things they did get right, exactly your words, but it's so important to recognize the things that have been toxic or affected us, because that's how you're going to keep going. And I'm so with you on that. Like there's certain things I refuse to repeat. I'm like, I am not having a relationship like that. I am going to move forward this way. Like I don't want to repeat that. Like I just want it to be filled with love and safety and trust, like you were
Yeah,
saying.
exactly that. And to feel that freedom to grow. Essentially, when you become a parent, your job is to raise these small humans up to be their own individuals. And my kids will disagree with me on things, and I'm okay with that. And I did a reel not so long ago where I said some of the things that I do with my kids that were never done with me. And like, my eldest, he's a tween, he's nearly 12, but he's hormonally, he's more 14. He's
Yes.
very kind of in that teenager phase. Even
Yep.
school were like, "This kid is peaking soon." Uh, and I will often say, like, I don't if we are discussing something and he loses his temper, I will pause, and he will invariably say, "I'm sorry I spoke to you like that," before I even get a chance to say anything. But I don't tell him off if I don't sort of say to him, "Do not back chat me." I mean, okay, occasionally I will say that to him, but mostly I will say to him, "Can you just take a deep breath? I understand that it's frustrating you. Take a deep breath and think about how you're speaking to me, and let's come back to it. And let's just take
Perfect.
a pause." And I've started to try and do that with him, because in my childhood there was so much shouting, and it was to the point where I didn't feel like I could challenge things. I just had to go along with the status quo. And
Yeah.
I want him to be able to formulate his own views on things and to be able
Mm-hmm.
to have his own thoughts. And sometimes I will say to him, "Well, I don't really shout at you," and he'll raise his eyebrows and say, "You do all the time." And I'm like, "But I don't." And then he'll go, "Well, no, not really."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "But not."
Look.
I literally make a concerted effort not to.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but
I love
he's,
that you give them that space because I think too sometimes when like with different emotions and things, like it can just kind of take over. Especially, I think you mentioned he was more sensitive as well. So giving that second to just breathe, as an adult, even that is so necessary for anyone. Ground
yeah.
the body because that'll help your brain work better and you'll be able to have a conversation and you're not all hot and spicy and like, so I think that's such a great practice to have.
Yeah, and I try really hard. One of the things that I had a lot when I was younger was what is called parentification. So
Mhm.
parentification is essentially when you are, as a child, there are several, well, there's lots of different ways in which you can have parentification for a child. For me, it was emotional parentification,
Mhm.
which is very much being made responsible for the adult in the relationship, be it mother or father's emotional state and well-being. There's also physical, whereby you might become the caregiver for younger siblings. You might be the one that's responsible for an excess of household chores. We're not talking about, can you go and hoover upstairs?
Yes.
We're talking about, you come home from school and you have no free time because you need to clean the house. That
Yeah.
is parentification. And emotionally, it's incredibly damaging for a
Mhm.
child. And we see quite a lot on things like TikTok where people will joke and say, "Hey, if you parented your mum, how's it going being child free? Because you've done it. You don't want to do it again." And
Mhm.
I think I went the flip side. I always wanted to be a mother because I felt like I was
Yeah.
already one. And I was very much, from the age of about 4, treated as my mum's confidant, my mum's best
Yes. The
friend, my mum's
therapist,
friend, oh
everything.
my good, her
Yeah.
therapist to the extreme.
Mhm.
And I think from that point of view, I'm very keen with my kids to make it known that I'm not their friend. And I think people find that a bit strange sometimes when they hear you say that, because they're like, "Oh, but I really like being with my kids and we're like best friends." And yes, parent child relationships, healthy ones, quite often mirror lots of the wonderful things about friendship. But when I have a friend, it's a reciprocal relationship whereby I can go
Exactly.
to them with my problems and they can come to me with theirs. And when you have
Yes.
that power imbalance between an adult parent and a young child, because it changes as you get a bit older,
Mhm.
obviously. But when
Mhm.
you have that power imbalance where mine are, where they're sort of 11, my 11-year-old doesn't want to know my woes. He is not responsible for my emotional well-being. And that's what's so
No.
important. And for me, it's really important that I create a safe space for him and for his emotions and do not expect that to be reciprocated.
Absolutely. Ah, yes. Like, I love that you brought that up because it can, especially like, doesn't matter the age, but as a younger child, like, you're still developing, you're still learning. And it's like you just said, it's not the child's responsibility to bear your burdens. Like, that's what your partner, your friends, your therapist, your whoever, that's what they're for because they have a developed brain where they can actually, like, you can actually have a conversation that might get somewhere. But if you're just loading that or dumping it on your child, what is that? That's like emotional dumping. That's not what we're here for. Like,
No, it's not, and it's so damaging. It really, truly is. To be the one that is responsible for an adult's emotional space and to never have your own safe emotional space. It
mhm.
teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you fawn response, which is people pleasing. Can be really damaging.
I
Yeah.
have worked through that issue a lot because it's so interesting too when you realize you do it because you don't think,
Yeah.
for me anyway, I didn't think I was doing it. And like
No.
I worked through other traumas and then finally there was space for me to deal with that one. And I was like, oh, I was like, I don't have to do this anymore because I was doing it to keep myself safe at one point, but I'm like, you're
Yeah.
not there anymore. You're fine. Like you don't need to do
Yeah.
this. So love that you brought that up.
Absolutely. And I think people pleasing, fawn response, it's very much, as you say, a tool to keep yourself safe. And when we put that in perspective for a child, it's that trauma that lives through to adulthood. And people don't even realize that they are people pleasers, that they are constantly saying yes to things, that they're constantly feeling that if they don't do certain things for certain people, then they won't be able to maintain that relationship, or that fear of rejection. Like, we've come full
Yes.
circle, that
Yes. Full
fear of
circle.
rejection, because it's so important to be able to say, I'm safe and I'm okay within myself, that if you don't like that I've responded to you in this way, and I know that I haven't done anything unkind or wrong or
Yes.
morally unfair,
Hmm.
then I need to be secure within myself to say, okay, well, if that me saying no to doing this has upset you, that's a you problem. And
Yes,
I'm not
that's a you
responsible for
problem.
that. That's a
Yes.
you problem, and you can move past that. And that's about boundary setting. And, that's something that is incredibly difficult to learn when you are the child of a toxic or emotionally immature parent. Because how do you set a boundary as a 5, 6 year old who has no one else?
Exactly. And
You
like your
don't.
brain still doesn't know. Like you and also too like sometimes like I the good girl or good boy syndrome I'll call it is like when you want to like you just want to please that parent or not rock the boat or whatever that may be and you just like, "Oh, well, if they're saying this, it must be what I should be doing." And then, again, it all comes back to the people pleasing because you're like trying to be perfect or good or whatever and it's just not the tea.
It's not the tea. It's not at all. So
Mm-mm.
it's something that I think collectively we can all work on.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, this was the best conversation. I say this so much, but I feel like I could talk to you for 5 hours. I'm
I
just like,
know.
this was so amazing. I want to know, I always have to ask, are there any final words of wisdom that you'd like to leave everybody with today?
Don't make your kids feel like they owe you a debt for existence. Be their emotional safe space. Don't make them yours. And be a little bit kinder to yourself and challenge that inner critic because she's an unnecessary bitch.
Preach it, sister. Thank you so, so much for joining me. I really appreciate you sharing your beautiful light with us. I can't wait for this to come out and for everyone to experience you. You're just a beautiful soul. Like I can feel your
Oh,
vibes through the screen.
thank you so much. Thank you. It's been really good fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Let's plug in your socials, your website, anything you'd like to plug in.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to find me is always either on Instagram, or if you're particularly interested in the estrangement, then looking at TikTok, because I talk a lot more about estrangement and toxic families over on TikTok than I do on my Instagram. I talk on both about it, but I'm always at Toby and Rue. So that is the best place to find me. I am now on YouTube as well. So I'm working on building up my YouTube. So do go and subscribe over there. That is Harriet Shearsmith. And you can find my website, which is tobyandrue.com. I do a weekly meal planner on there, which I'm going to lay it out for you, is for me. It's not for you. It's so that I can actually work out what I'm going to shop and work out my meals, and I don't end up just going, do you want pizza again?
Yeah.
So I think it's there for, it's a collective thing. We're
I
all we're
love
all
that.
we're all gaining from it.
Yes.
And my podcast, I already have one podcast called Mummin It,
Mhm.
and then my new podcast, which will be focusing around navigating the estrangement, generational trauma, and toxic families in a digital world, will be called Unfollowing Mum. That will be launching at some point
That's
this
a
month.
great title. That's awesome.
I'd love to take credit for it, and I am going to tell you this, but this was a friend of mine who was like, I think you should call it Unfollowing Mum. I was like, can I? He was like, I give you
Yeah.
full permission. I do. I give you full permission to just be like unfollow. I was like, what about blocked? He was like, whoa, horsey, don't go too far.
Yeah.
That's a bit extreme.
We'll just
Okay,
unfollow. Yeah.
I'm just gonna unfollow. Don't go too far. So that will be my new podcast, which will be launching at some point through January. You can check my socials and find out more about that. And I also have my book, which is Mumming It,
Yes.
and you guys can get it over there. I have a it's UK and US edition and Canadian edition, I believe. So you guys can
Perfect.
find it over there, which is Mummin It, and you can buy that in any bookstore.
Perfect. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. And for everyone on YouTube, this will all be linked in the description box. So there'll be no trouble. And podcast will be in the show notes. So if you want, everything's going to be linked, everything she listed. So
Amazing.
I can't wait. Oh my gosh, so amazing. I want to thank all the viewers and listeners as always. This community would not be what it is without each and every one of you tuning in and bringing your energy into this podcast. I truly appreciate it. And again, I want to express my gratitude to you, Harriet. You're just lovely. So I appreciate you so much. And I'm so excited for your new podcast coming. I can't wait to check it out. It's going to be so great.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it as well. And I'm hoping that it helps a lot of people feel seen, because there, anybody who has been through estrangement will tell you there is quite a bit out there for the parent of an adult child who's become estranged. There is next to nothing out there for us adult children. So it's about time that there was something to support us too.
Yes, preach, yes. Well, that is our tea time for today, everyone. I want to wish you all love and light as always, and we will see you next week.